Welcome back to the Algarve. Now, this is intended to be very much a first impressions video because I could only have the Sportster S for 15 minutes. When the dealer told me this, I was initially disappointed, but as I'll explain, it actually turned out to be a blessing with this particular bike, and what looked like being the shortest video of all time has actually turned out to be a pretty decent length because I'm seizing the opportunity to introduce a new feature that I'll be including on all future bike tests on my channel. Every cloud, as they say. I don't really know why, but I was slightly more apprehensive than usual about this particular test ride. Sure, it was my first time on any Harley, but I've ridden plenty of other makes for the first time and never felt quite like this. Kind of a mix of I'm not worthy and I bet this is going to be a massive letdown skepticism. The sales guy didn't help when he came out with "Are you ready to be amazed?" as his opening gambit. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, he would only let me have the bike for 15 to 20 minutes, which I couldn't really understand as it was a quiet Thursday afternoon in November and I was the only potential customer in sight. As things turned out though, he actually did me a favour, but more of that later. First off, the looks. Well, in all honesty, this is what appealed to me from the outset and why I was determined to pop my Harley cherry. I'm not saying it's a beautiful bike, but it certainly is very striking. It's low and muscular, and while balloon tyres and high exhausts aren't really my style personally, there's no denying that the overall result does draw attention. With my black helmet, dark visor and black riding gear, I must admit I did feel as though I was living the Terminator fantasy just a little bit. The fit and finish is very good, although I did notice a couple of bolts that were already showing signs of rust, and the components used on that single disc front brake are frankly unworthy of a €16,000 price point. Seat height is only 753mm, which is a centimetre lower than my tiny Honda Grom, so no problem at all flat footing on both sides even for a shorter rider. A shorter rider or a female rider, I was looking at the Sportster as a possible new bike for my wife, might struggle to get it upright off its kickstand, however. The stand seems rather short, meaning the 230 kilo bike leans over at what appears to be a slightly precarious angle. I mounted and dismounted a handful of times during the short test ride and triple checked every time to make sure the bike wasn't going to topple over on its side. Something you no doubt get used to, but it does require a fair bit of strength to ride the bike once you're sitting on it, which might be an issue for some. Firing the bike up, it certainly sounds powerful, but also slightly rough, a bit loud in a shouty kind of way, at least for the first couple of seconds, but then things calm down a bit. The engine is a 1250, pushing out 120 horsepower and 125 newton meters of torque, so quite an increase from the 100 horsepower and 112 newton meters of my Triumph Speed Twin. The Sportster does weigh an equally significant 30 kilos more than my bike, however, so I wasn't expecting much of a change in performance. It certainly dishes up the power, the torque is there low down, and it gets a shift on when you open the throttle. It's on a par with the Speed Twin in this respect, so the extra power from the engine is pretty much negated by the extra weight. It's less frantic than a Ducati Diavel, for example, and just, well, less than the Triumph Rocket. The brakes are a bit of a letdown though. A single disc up front to stop 230 kilos pushed along by 120 horsepower. Come on Harley, that's just not good enough. They do the job, the bike does slow down, but you really have to squeeze the lever and use the rear brake as an assist. I did like the clock, very clear and legible, even in this autumn sunshine with the sun low in the sky. At least the main information is legible, speed and revs. The gear indicator, riding mode and fuel icons are a bit small and difficult to read at a glance. I'm not sure why Harley decided to do this because there did seem to be a fair bit of unused real estate on the dial. The handling was okay, safe and predictable, just like any other new bike on the market nowadays. I didn't have time to take the Sportster to any faster, twistier roads unfortunately, but turn-in is inevitably hampered by the unnecessarily fat tyres. Getting it round these small roundabouts on this main road required a fair bit of concentration, for example, and reminded me of a sort of 4/5 scale Triumph Rocket. Now, the riding position could best be described as unusual. That's not a problem per se. I get that these bikes are slightly left field, and so I was expecting to have to change my riding habits a little. I've ridden many feet forward bikes and scooters where you have your legs more or less stretched out in front of you, and I've ridden many sportier machines that require a torso forward position over the tank, head and neck tilted down towards the handlebars. However, I've never had to adopt both these positions simultaneously, at least on a motorcycle. The Sportster not only forces your feet well forward, but also expects you to hang on to bars that seem way too far from your shoulders. Think rowing machine, permanently in the halfway position, and you're just about there. Now, I'm bracing myself for angry comments from HD aficionados saying that I don't know how to ride properly, or it's because I've never ridden a cruiser before, and probably even some remarks questioning my sexuality, like when I said I didn't want the Triumph Rocket I'd ordered. But sorry, and this is just my personal preference, it's an extremely unnatural and uncomfortable position to be in for any length of time, at least when you're in your 50s like I am. I'm sure it'd be very cool if I were 12, but I'm not, and so it's uncomfortable. I think, sensing my disappointment on the post-test ride debrief, the dealer advised me that there's a conversion kit available from Harley to bring the pegs backwards, but this is €1,000, which seems a bit steep, and more to the point, it beggars the question, why offer such a posture-correcting kit if the original riding position is okay? I think the answer is simple. The Sportster S is all about the looks and conveying an image. It's a striking bike that has clearly been designed to make the rider look as cool and badass as possible, and I totally get that. The low stance, high exhaust and fat tyres do combine to make the bike look mean even when it's parked. And I'll be the first to admit that I did enjoy intimidating the traffic and frightening little old ladies during my brief spell on the bike. But, and this is the real killer, that rowing machine riding position, firm seat and super hard rear suspension meant that I began to develop a pain in my upper back after literally 2 minutes riding. It was so bad that I stopped 3 times during the 15-minute test ride to do a couple of stretching exercises quickly by the side of the road. So the Harley-Davidson Sportster S is a great-looking, loud bike, both figuratively and literally, but not really for me. And this got me thinking. Like many of you, I imagine, I subscribe to Doug DeMuro's YouTube channel. Sometimes he reviews cars that I'm not particularly interested in, and this is usually because they're not available here in Europe, so I have little chance of ever owning one. But I do always fast forward to the RocketScore section, as I enjoy how he runs through the different categories. And so, with the aim of introducing a similar level of consistency into my reviews, I've decided to unashamedly take Doug's idea and adapt it to the world of motorbikes. Now, this is clearly going to be a personal subjective evaluation of each bike and may well include certain categories which to you might be very important. But I wanted to keep things relatively simple and so have deliberately kept the number of criteria down to a manageable number. So, for example, there's no specific category for fuel consumption or pillion carrying abilities, but I have tried to include as many things as possible under each category. For example, quality includes things like components used, the fit and finish of the plastic panels, and the quality of the paintwork. Similarly, engine will include power, torque, and exhaust note, and commute covers how practical a bike is to live with every day and how feasible it is to use as transport to and from work. You are, of course, perfectly free to disagree with any of the figures, but I do not intend getting into a debate in the comments section about why the Triumph Rocket should get 4 for styling or the Honda Grom 8 for handling. At the end of the day, the RocketScore, as I'm calling it, is just a bit of fun and really not worth getting hot under the collar about. I'm not going to attempt to justify every mark I've given here, but as this video is also about the Sportster S, I'll quickly run through my reasoning about this bike and leave you to contemplate the rest of the table if you're interested. You'll notice that I haven't given any 1s or 10s because A, there's no such thing as perfect, and B, to give me some wiggle room should a mind-blowing innovation surface in the future. I must admit I did consider giving our Honda Vision 1 out of 10 for styling, but that's too cruel. It is totally lacking in sex appeal and instantly robs me of what little street cred I have. But it's not hideously ugly, so it gets a 2. So to the Harley-Davidson Sportster S and styling. It certainly is a striking bike with its hunkered down stance, enormous tyres and exhaust that looks like some sort of artillery weapon, but it's not exactly beautiful and it could be a novelty look that fades with time, so I'll give it a 7. Quality is high, fit and finish is excellent, a legible clock for the most part, but I spotted a few signs of rust on what was, to all intents and purposes, a brand new bike that spent all of its short life in sunny, dry Portugal, and Harley has cheaped out on some of the important components like front brakes and rear suspension, so it gets a 6. The engine is powerful, plenty of torque, but the bike's weight means that the extra 20 horsepower it has over my Speed Twin, for example, is largely wasted, or at least difficult to feel, and the slightly clattery noise on startup is surprising, so I can only give it a 7 out of 10. Handling: this is essentially a cruiser dressed up and named in a way that we think it's a sports bike. It most certainly is not, and while the handling is safe and predictable, the wide tyres require more concentration in the bends than I like personally, and you need a firm shove to get the bike to lean over more than about 20 degrees, 4 out of 10. Comfort is what really lets this bike down for me. There's basically none at all, at least for a rider of my age and morphology. I had quite severe back pain for about 12 hours after riding the bike for only 15 minutes, and the tiny amount of travel in the rear shocks makes for an extremely challenging experience. The bike is crying out for a more swept back handlebar option to improve the riding position, but as it stands, this is without a doubt the most uncomfortable bike I've ever ridden by quite some margin, as my spine will testify. I thought long and hard about awarding a 1, but I'll be generous and give it a 2 out of 10. The brakes are disappointing. A single disc front brake, even with a 4-pot Brembo caliper at this price point, and more importantly weight point and power point, is unacceptable. As regular viewers know, I like huge stopping power, and this bike just doesn't provide that and feels underbraked, 4 out of 10. Finally, value. Relatively accessible for a Harley, but here in Portugal it's still 16,000 euros before road tax, dealer fees and any options you might want. That's 3,000 more than my Triumph Speed Twin, which offers similar performance, and 6,000 more than the Honda Rebel 1100, which offers similar looks. I suppose the Indian Scout is about the closest competitor, 25 horsepower down, but 1,500 euros cheaper. But I get that you're buying into a brand here, and what price looking, or at least feeling, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, so I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Total 4.75, placing it here in my list of top bikes I've ridden. The Sportster S is an exciting machine that certainly works for a rider who is looking for looks. The engine is powerful and build quality is good, but the bike's downfall lies in its poor brakes and truly horrendous lack of comfort. Let me know what you think of the RocketScore idea in the comments below, but please can we avoid arguing about what are very subjective and quite possibly erroneous marks? As always, thanks for watching.